Welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk series brought to you by AKFI, the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit sustainability association committed to bridging the gap between ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. Actionable ESG Talk series bring together great minds to discuss the current state and future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. I'm delighted to be here with our guest. Uh, I want to thank Gene for being the second time our guest here and a long-term and an enthusiastic supporter of AKFI. So, hello, Gene, and without further ado, what trends do you see in next generation energy? We can talk about nuclear, solar, and of course batteries because we need storage.
Sure. Hi, Manuel, and thanks for having me, and thank you, AKFI. Happy to discuss these topics. They're all top of mind and really shaping the new industry of the future. So I think relative to the next generation of energy, I think probably we need to think about and take a step back for a minute as to what's really driving that desire for the next generation of energy, because we've kind of been doing things same old way for many, many years. And, globally and in the US, we're relying on fossil fuels, a lot of coal and natural gas and nuclear and other things that have been, working very well. Most recently, we've added solar into the mix with a lot of wind into the mix. They're looking at wave energy. So a lot of new different things, fusion. But I think at the end, it becomes sort of the request of how do we deal with this upcoming load that's facing, particularly the U.S. and globally, but I'll focus on the U.S. I think that makes the most sense for this meeting. And we saw an influx of energy needs with EV charging. There was a sort of an EV renaissance, electrical vehicles under the last administration, a lot of money, and the green, exposure to everything that we can do to, offer a better environment for ourselves with solar and wind and energy storage and EV charging. And so that was the next sort of thing that was facing our grid. Here in California, where I'm located, EV charging is a very big thing, and it has been honestly being driven long before the previous administration and long before there was any push for EV charging. So now here we start to see the infrastructure and how we're dealing with adding a lot of EV charging, and that has posed some challenges. The grid itself can support some EV charging, the power production that we have, but the localized grid is really not very well equipped to deal with a lot of EV charging. It can handle some EV charging across the grid, but if you start to localize EV charging for fleets or other really highly concentrated areas where there's a lot of truck charging and real heavy big battery charging, those loads in those localized areas are in excess in many cases, even of what the grid can support now. The utilities will bring new power over there, but that is even a challenge in itself. So that's sort of the first infrastructure challenge that we're having, and that can be accomplished, with using some kind of combination of a on-site solar and a microgrid with a battery, and even using some micro turbines or small power generation devices, engines and whatnot to provide that localized microgrid to support that EV infrastructure. So that's solving itself as we go, and the grid itself will still need to be continually need to be upgraded along the way. But most recently, I think we're facing just a much bigger challenge. And as we start to look into this administration, and now we have a focus on everything related to all the infrastructure needed to provide power to computers and computing for all these big data centers, and required for artificial intelligence, required for all the things related to you know, Bitcoin and everything else that's in the digital space. It is a 10x or more fold of power required. It's so great that we're already constrained by the amount of AI and amount of that infrastructure by the power that we're able to create. And many of those companies, ones that everybody's familiar with that are doing this, and Google and Metas and all the biggest folks that are building data centers right now. There's so many of them. They're already been out running over the last year and a half, looking for areas on the grid where there's a potential to first get power, just obtain power from a utility that has extra capacity. And that power is needed 24/7. It's not just like, hey, we need it certain times. We need it all day, all night, and it's a lot of base load power. I mean, these things are, excess of a gigawatt in many cases, which, just to even talk about a gigawatt of anything, that's already getting into a huge full-size power plant, full natural gas power plant, full big nuclear power plant. These are typically anywhere from 1 to 3 gigawatts, and they power up entire cities or counties or, half of a state. So now you're putting these things onto the grid. And so the first area is like, where can we find power? And then the next is can we find power also that's cheaper? So maybe in the Pacific Northwest, where you might see a lot of that hydropower, where it's not only there's a good capacity, but you have lower cost energy powering your facility. So the first round of that, those sites are already gone. They're already accounted for, they're already spoken for, they've already signed contracts. So now that becomes the next set of problems is, okay, there's no more available grid capacity provided by current utilities. Now what, right? Like, this is the big question, is like, now what do we do? We want to build these immediately or within the next 1 to 3 years. And, openly, there's really no simple solution to that. If we look at traditional, baseload power, that would come from fossil fuels. So that's
Yeah.
right now, for the best intentional purposes, that would be natural gas. And when you look at large natural gas turbines and very large equipment, you could pick engines. There's manufacturers that can, do a lot of those things, but they're so far behind already in their procurement and their building of those. Those are 2 to 3 years away, and they're already booked out, some of them longer than that. So you're already kind of behind the eight ball there if you want to build something in 2 years, and there's not going to be any power there for 3 or 4, just with natural gas. So many developers are like, okay, how do we go quicker? There's been several that have found locations, I don't want to say in the middle of nowhere, but in areas where there's a lot of sun and they have thousands of acres, and they're like, okay, like, we want to go fast. Let's let's just go ahead and build a gigawatt of solar. Let's build that quickly and add a lot of batteries, right? Let's Big batteries, utility scale style. So that's an option. It's not necessarily always the most efficient option in the
Nor
short
the
term.
most sustainable, right? Because
Yeah, well, I mean, in the short
building
option,
these large batteries they have impact on the environment, right?
yes, I
Rare
think that
minerals, rare earths, all these things going in a battery, and they have relatively limited lifespan.
exactly spot on, Manuel. There's challenges to the energy storage component of that. But that being said, their willingness to take some of that risk and deal with some of those environmental impacts is kind of outweighed by the fact that they want to go fast.
Yeah.
So their goal is speed to market, and they're gonna, like, kind of look aside on some of those items. And so the challenge is there. You have again, very large pieces of land. And then there's a layer in front of that that's an environmental impact review. And that impact review could take quite a bit of time. So that could delay things a year and a half or longer. And then you start to want to build. The build can go relatively quickly. You know, the availability of solar panels is fast. Batteries, maybe, you know, depending on the manufacturer, those can also work pretty well. So, you know, you're getting a lot of electricity, base load power, but now you've consumed a tremendous amount of land to do it. And maybe the long-term benefits are, okay, you don't have to continue to use fossil fuel to provide that power. The sun's going to do that. Batteries will store the power. And then to your point, okay, we have a replacement schedule on the batteries. And what is that going to cost? And what is that going to do? And so now you got electricity for the facilities. You still need to cool them. So you're not just providing the power for, for all of these servers, you're providing the power for the chillers. So it's this tremendous amount of power that you need day and night to do that. And over the long run, maybe you start getting above 10 years and beyond. If the replacement cost for the energy storage is not ridiculous by then the economics could look pretty good if the power was coming from the solar and you're not beholden to the fossil fuel influx and change of pricing. So that's sort of that near term, very quick option. Natural gas is, as I said, is a great option. Again, it's the timing of the turbines. The benefit of using the natural gas in a turbine or engine or any ICE type of engine is really that you're not only getting baseload power in a very small, dense area, but you get the waste heat, and the waste heat can be used to run adsorption chilling. So now you got kind of the best benefit of that gas. The efficiency of a cogeneration plant like that is many times above 85 to 90 or 95% efficient use of the gas. So gas is used to create electricity. Gas is used to create that chilled cooling loop, and it's done 24/7 in a small footprint. So ideally, that's a very sustainable approach, doesn't use a lot of land. It's just the timing of how long will it take to build that gas-fired plant, and of course you're beholden to the fossil fuel pricing that certainly can change over the years. But many of these folks are buying very long-term contracts on gas and locking in those prices to minimize some of that risk. So that's the second option there. Those are both good options for different reasons. And then I think probably the third and maybe the best option is really coming on the horizon very, very quickly, and that's the small modular nuclear reactors that everyone's been talking
Can
about.
you can you tell us what's the status with that? I don't follow it closely.
Yeah,
I see all kind of news flashes. So
yeah. I mean, so just in terms of small modular nuclear reactors, frankly, we've been putting these on our ships for many, many years. These run our submarines. These run our, aircraft carriers. We're running on nuclear. They don't need fuel for 20 years. It is a sustainable energy generation value, and it cools those ships. It provides steam for the ships. It does everything. So it's not new. Now there are new technologies in the modular reactors, and the status of that is that many of them are all going through different sort of levels of testing right now. The idea of somebody having a nuclear reactor in their backyard, for around these city centers is not something that people tend to like to talk about. They have a lot of bad sort of thoughts in their minds around nuclear accidents like 3 Mile Island, the accident in Japan, and many of these others where, now you've got like a nuclear wasteland, and what do you do about it? And so the things that are changing in the nuclear reactors themselves is the fuels. The fuels are moving away from typical uranium fuel to maybe a thorium or other types of fuels that are safe in terms of how they operate. And the waste fuel is not something that we need to worry about. Now it's nuclear fissile material that could be used in a bomb or things of that nature. So they're starting to work on things that are much safer, taking some of that from France that's already been doing that. And I would say there's probably, off the top of my head, maybe 20 companies that are doing this at different levels. There's a top maybe 5 companies that are really, pushing the boundaries of getting there first. And so now, if you look at the timeline, well, the value of it is, as I just mentioned, it's going to provide baseload power 24/7. It's going to do it in a very small footprint, like natural gas would. You don't need to run big gas lines to it to feed it. It's going to be fed by that nuclear material, and it's going to run for a very long time doing that. That's what makes it sustainable. And there's a heat portion, a waste heat portion of that, and that waste heat will also be used for chilling. So these are going to be nuclear cogen generation facilities, and ultimately it will be the future of all these data centers as they go forward. They're all going to want to have, very low cost fuel, very low cost operations. They're going to want chilling, chilled water loop to cool their facilities and their servers 24/7. So it kind of hits all the marks in terms of doing that, and that's a huge deal for America and for artificial intelligence to be able to get them going. The challenge is that we have not quite gotten there yet in terms of the technology and testing. So when we talk about a timeline, the nuclear timeline, even though under this administration it's being accelerated as much as we can, and there's a lot of Department of Energy involved in this now, making sure that what we're going to do is going to be safe and it's going to work. It's still, we're still years out. So when you think about, maybe a natural gas plant that would be built in that 3 to 5 year period and get all the local approvals and permits, that's all things that we've done before very easily, and it can be done again. With nuclear, it's not so easy. We certainly can, get the technology ready, make sure that's safe. But then there are hurdles, with environmental and local hurdles with every jurisdiction. So if you think about it, the very first time a nuclear power plant is going to go into some small localized city that needs it for its data center, that local jurisdiction and those inspectors, they have probably zero knowledge about a nuclear power plant and what it's required to approve that nuclear power plant. So you're going to get a lot of delays in the permitting. You're going to get delays in environmental. There's going to be delays all the way along until the technology becomes more mainstream. And you think about that, that's going to happen in every state. That's going to happen in every jurisdiction. So it's not like you're going to do it in one place and go, okay, that's good. Now it's going to work across the country. You're going to have to take all that, what you did at that first site, and then bring it to the next jurisdiction and city and state and get them to approve it. Some of those regulations will need to be amended regulations within their governance, local regulations within their governance. So there are laws and rules that are going to have to be changed. There are things that are going to need to be accelerated. Money will drive all this to happen. Certainly, it'll happen probably faster than it would have normally because there's such a great need. But without it, we are going to be really kind of in a jam, up until that mark of where there's just not no power to run these data centers. So I really feel that is going to be the best path forward. And once that becomes standardized, then actually the small and medium nuclear reactors like that, those could be used to run cities. So you're actually in a place where right now the cities continue to grow, but in these areas that are very densely occupied, those are opportunities too to look at grid weaknesses. If you think about all up and down the East Coast with grid outages, and having power come from one source, and it's, a transmission line goes out, one of the big ones, the entire city is going to go down with no power for, hundreds of thousands of people. So by having these little mini microgrid nuclear reactors more localized, the chance of knocking out the entire eastern seaboard is much more difficult because power is coming from a more localized source. And
Gene,
in the case of like a
made you,
big building,
yeah, no, please go ahead.
I'll just finish with this. In the case of very large buildings, some of these really big skyscrapers, maybe they take a couple city blocks. They use a lot of power themselves. So you could literally power the entire building and provide heating and cooling like a building. Think of a an aircraft carrier, right? It's a floating city. So you think of a really big building or a group of buildings, and you'd have a very small nuclear reactor providing 5, 10, 20 megawatts for that little localized area, and the entire building can work off district cooling or district heating. So you're not running, necessarily normal air conditioning. You're doing the same thing you're doing in the data center with adsorption chilling, and you're also providing heat, which is very easy. You're just taking the waste heat and using it for the mechanical air makeup of the building. So that's really going to be the future. We can't do solar in a city like that. It just won't work. So that's what's going to really do it over the next 10 years.
I'll take you a little bit in the future. So, two things, two different questions in very different directions, and we can develop each. But what you projected is actually, can we have commercial ships running on nuclear, reducing the amount of carbon footprint? We have heavy oils actually on ships, right? Tar and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
that seems to be a technology that is already in place, proven. You don't need to be a, a large, air carrier to have a ship on nuclear power. So I think the technology exists already and it's fairly uh, well proven. The other
Manuel,
question, because I'll ask two questions from two different directions, it seems that national grids are an extreme case of centralization, right? Everything is in a central location. We distribute the power, and we have all these imbalances, environmental events, and all this. Are we moving to decentralized? So that's the second question. So the first question is, do you see a future for transportation, especially maritime transportation?
yeah, those are both great questions. And for maritime, I think that is a 100% yes. Certainly, it's already being done, not just by the US. China is running some commercial nuclear ships. Russia runs nuclear ships. They these icebreakers that are up in the far great north there. Those are not run on nuclear. So I think that right there, if you want to consider the environmental impact of running bunker fuel, which is what's in ships now. It's very dirty fuel, and it adds a lot to the cost of shipping. So when you think about how much weight that you have to carry in fuel, and then you have to think about what's the carbon exposure to that if you are paying carbon taxes on that and in the environment, um, that all goes away. So, you eliminate all that with a nuclear reactor on board these ships as long as it's safe and there's not an issue. It's the same that holds true for the data centers, for the cities, for the ships. It needs to be safe. Okay, once it is, and we know it is, then you're just swapping out those nuclear reactors. Frankly, it's probably going to be a different kind of build. I mean, there's two ways of kind of running a ship like that, and so with what we have now, bunker fuel, and you're running that fuel to run a steam turbine and so forth. You could replace that with just straight up nuclear, or there's probably options that are going to come in the future of electrifying a ship where the nuclear power makes electricity and that runs motors. And so yet to be seen on that. I think the quickest swap out would just swap out the big oil boilers that are running steam turbines with a nuclear power plant, and it's creating plenty of steam running those turbines. And you're going to be running at a lot lighter weight. You're not going to have millions of gallons of fuel on board. which is also another could be another natural disaster, right?
If
If a ship goes down, then that oil wastes all throughout that area and kills kind of everything. I think in the case of a nuclear reactor, likely the way that they would make those for the marine would be so penetrated, almost tough like a turtle, where that, the ship may go down, but that nuclear reactor will very likely be in place. It's not gonna, they're gonna make it to where it's not gonna break up and, just basically dump nuclear waste into the ocean. So that'll be a design criteria. So I really see that as a big future for that. A lot of people are not talking about nuclear for ships, but it certainly has the legs. And the other thing is think about with that lower amount of fuel, less weight, and no fuel costs. Essentially, once you fill it once, you're good. The cost of the moving the materials is going to drop significantly. So that's going to be good. You'll be able to put more containers on a ship based on the fact that you're not weighing it down with oil. And then the other thing is, diesel fuel. And then the other is that you're not going to be paying for all that diesel fuel with its fluctuating prices over time. So you'll
the
move
whole
more.
supply chain, right? Because diesel fuel doesn't, we don't extract diesel. We have to transport it, refine it, transport it again.
It's a tremendous amount, and on those big ships, they're not refined. The diesel is bunker fuel. It's not refined as much as it would be for like diesel trucks in the U.S. or even farm equipment. It is sort of unrefined diesel, so it burns. It doesn't burn cleanly at all, frankly. But it is the most economical way to move material across the ocean. So by necessity, once that happens, the financial economics of that nuclear reactor and what it can do for those shippers is going to change so dramatically that once they get a hold of it, they're going to move as fast as they can to basically de debunker fuel their fleet and nuclearize their fleet in a way that makes them a leader, and they'll have much more cost advantage against their competitors, whoever does that first. So, I expect probably Maersk or some of these very large, maybe even China, Costco, these big shipping companies that are willing to sort of take a first mover position there. And you'll be seeing that over the next 10 years too. So right now we're just talking about data centers, and that's been the big thing. But, if you're in that business of moving product across the ocean, you're certainly thinking about that. And also similarly, when they pull into a port, they pull into a port and they're still running their bunker fuel. They're running their engines. They don't shut them down typically. A lot of ports want to figure a way to how they can plug into the grid, but they use so much power. It's a difficult thing to have them plug into the grid. So, if you think about taking a port and adding a small, medium nuclear reactors or multiples of those, now a ship can come in, whether it's on bunker fuel or nuclear, doesn't matter, and the ship can plug into localized on-site power and shut down. They probably won't shut down a reactor. They may leave that going, but really bunker fuels, that would be one thing they could shut down. So just thinking about this now, talking with you, I would think that before even the ships do it, probably the ports will do it first. And the ports will provide a
Interesting.
way to stop them burning bunker fuel while they're unloading and loading. That'll all stop. And then they don't need to run those ships. So just shut the ship down, plug into shore fuel, shore powered from the nuclear, and then take off on their bunker fuel.